I wasn't actually born in India. I think for me, there are three cities I think about: Mumbai, Bangalore, and Pune. Each of these stages shaped me in different ways.
When YouTube was not obvious, it was not a big company. What convinced you to be part of YouTube?
So in 2006, I was in a marketing class in business school, and I was trying to convince my student group that we should do a project on YouTube. Some people are like, it'll probably get shut down next year. And the professor then agreed with them, and he was like, yeah, you're right, you should go do something else. And then a little bit later, the acquisition happened. It's funny, I interviewed for Google. I ended up joining as the founding PM on YouTube Live. My boss's boss said, he's like, hey, by the way, you should know, I think there's a 50% chance we have to shut down this business.
How AI is going to impact into different areas of our lives.
I find now I make so much faster progress. I literally fire up 4 different LLMs and just start talking. And then it's like literally having 4 incredibly smart friends that are smart in different ways. What we're doing now is democratizing intelligence. So imagine the power that gives each of us to like organize our lives. Certainly, any job that involves sitting at a computer for long amounts of time is, if you're not transforming it now, that transformation will be forced on you in the next year or two.
What excites you the most about Indian technology ecosystem?
Now I think you have a generation of leaders. You've had like multiple stages of companies, sort of doing that well, and multiple generations of product leaders, eng leaders who understand what scaling looks like, what scaling an org looks like. Frankly, the maturity of the ecosystem is also sort of remarkable.
YouTube, Google Search, Google AI, meaning Gemini, these are products billions use daily, and today's guest, Satyajeet Salgar, helped shape all of them. From helping build YouTube when YouTube was not obvious to building new ways people discover, search, and learn, he's been quite an architect of the internet age. Born in Africa, raised in India, educated at Stanford, Satyajit's story is a power mix of curiosity, culture, and code. This conversation goes deep into AI, India's tech rise, and what the future will demand from all of us. Let's get into it. Satyajit, I am super excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited. I'm excited to chat.
Satyajit, look, what an incredible journey you've had so far. You've played a significant role in helping build YouTube, Google, uh, Google Search, and currently you're at Google AI, which we will talk about in a bit. And as we know, YouTube and Google Search are used by billions of users today, and it's only helping make life better for a lot of users. Satyajit, to begin with, maybe let's start from the beginning. We're really a byproduct of our environment. What
Mhm.
really shaped you the most while growing up in India?
So, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I agree. I think you are a function of all the experiences you've had. I think for me, there are 3 cities I think about when I think about sort of growing up in India: Mumbai, Bangalore, and Pune, because these were the 3 cities I sort of lived in. However, in my case, it's interesting. I wasn't actually born in India, so my parents took a job. My dad took a job in Africa a couple of years before I was born. So I was born in Africa, and then I spent the first. Uh, I lived an expat life because we were in Africa when I was growing up until I was 15. Every summer we spent in Mumbai, right? So I would sort of, so that's my memory. And it was odd because I was in a CBSE school. So all through, I was in a CBSE school in Africa, summers in Mumbai, where I would spend, time with mainly my grandparents, but other family members. And then later on, from my 11th and 12th, I moved to Bangalore for college. I went to Pune. Um, and I think, each of these stages shaped me in different ways. And I when I think of home in India, I tend to think of these 3 cities. Later on, my parents sort of moved back to Mumbai, so that became sort of home. And now I go back. I spend about a month every year there. So that sort of is the way we've sort of grown up. I think in my mind, like I think this is true for most of us, but I think it's particularly true of my generation, which is you were told like, no, you have to study hard and you have to get a good job because that's the path forward, right? And I think in my generation was much more study hard, get a job, and sort of that is then you're set up for your path. I think when I, look at people, 10, 15 years younger than me, they saw more options. They started seeing, oh no, we don't necessarily need to leave India to get great jobs. There are like incredible companies here. There's incredible opportunity here. But I think for me, it was A, this focus on education. The second, especially when I think about comparing it to other sort of cultures, there was this idea that yes, you should do well at work, but that's not your entire life, right? Like how you think about family, how you think about your community is also important. And so to me, like success has always been, yeah, you should do well at work, obviously, but there's much more than that. And so to me, that sort of has shaped, sort of, I'd say like our core ideas of what you're growing up like. But it's also like, I think for most of us, the movies you watch, the books you read, the influences you have, all of those become part of you. And for me, sort of, I'd say India influences me as much in that way as it does, like, sort of having lived there and all of that stuff. So yeah, that's how it. But it is. I think how you grow up, where you grow up, do affect sort of, how you see the world and how you build things.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure as you mentioned, 10 to 15 years younger,
Hmm.
they have more options, and I'm sure your kids will have even way more options.
Oh yeah.
And Satyajit, was US always in mind? What made you move to the US?
It was. I wish I would say it was a very thoughtful, well planned decision. I think it is one of those things where life sort of takes you in that direction. So I think it was at the time a lot of people, if you were, I knew I wanted to study engineering. Very specifically, I knew that I wanted to study computer science or computer engineering. And it was a very fuzzy thought that like, no, I like these things. I like thinking about this. I should focus on it. And then it was a very common path for students when I was sort of I was in engineering college. It was like, oh, you try and do your masters, you try and then find a job in the US, was one very common path. The other path, which frankly I was more at the time interested in, was sort of giving the cat and trying to get into an IIM. And I was sort of doing both, and I was like, let's see what happens. Kya hota hai dekhte hain. And sometimes these things, these decisions get made for you. I felt really sick before the cat, and I just couldn't go and give the exam. And so I was like, okay, fine. Like we might work for a year and then go do this, or let's see what happens. And then fortunately, I did well on the GREs. I got into a bunch of good schools, and I think the options were good enough. I was like, okay, you know what? Another time, a few of my friends were also going to different places in the US. I was like, all right, let's go along and see what happens. And that's how I ended up in the US. My first job was, at a startup. I ended up working for basically a startup that a professor whose class I'd taken ended up co-founding, and that ended up being my first job. I tried a startup on the side, and then one thing led to the other. I Again, my dad had drilled this idea that I should go to business school, so I was like, okay, I've been working for a few years, so like now let's go to business school. I went to business school. I said, like, okay, now let's uh, let's let's work for a couple of years and maybe do a startup again. And that took me to Google. And then then one sequence of opportunities after the other, you stay. And then life takes over. I got married, I had kids, and you never. I think at different points I did consider going back to India, but one set of sequences the other, like you ended up staying in the US. So I don't know if I ever had I definitely want to be in the US. It was a path that a lot of people were taking then. And then it's been a good path. I can't complain about it. Like I've had interesting opportunities and things to work on. I've met really great people. I've had the chance to do really good work. So all of that has been good.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting, Satyajit. No, we are starting to see this culture in India now, where professors are founding companies,
Yeah.
and IIT Madras stands out in that culture.
No, that's actually really great to hear because one of the things I remember the most about is so I got my master's at Stanford, and there it was a very common thing for almost every other professor that I was taking a class from had founded a company, at least one. Some
Mhm.
went on to do multiple companies. And so it is. I'm actually pretty excited. I didn't realize that was happening, but I'm really excited that is now happening in India as well.
Mhm.
Because again, it means two things. It means a there are professors that appreciate their students pushing in that direction, and b, like, it means the companies that are being founded generally have some strong technical insight that is driving those companies.
Mhm.
I when I was at Stanford, uh, uh, Mendel Rosenbaum had founded like VMware and was sort of doing both things. We had a bunch of professors that had founded other startups in the networking space. So it's actually cool, and it was very like you you can't become what some people are incredible and can like imagine their futures, but it helps to see someone doing something and you go like, oh, I can also do that.
Yeah.
And so I do think that was very useful.
Mhm.
So I'm glad that's happening.
Yeah, yeah. And Satyajit, look, you joined YouTube
Hmm.
when YouTube was not obvious. It was not a big company. I think Google had just acquired YouTube.
Yep.
Uh, what convinced you to be part of YouTube when really it was not like a massive or
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
micro?
So I have a funny YouTube story. So in 2006, I was still in business school. I was in a marketing class in business school, and I was tried to convince my student group that we should do a project on YouTube. And I actually like we in the first trial, like I was able to convince my team, and they're like, yeah, okay, fine. But then, like, some people are like, oh, we're not actually sure that anything will happen of this site. It'll probably get shut down next year. And I was like, what are you people talking about? And the professor then agreed with them. And he was like, no, 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 like, yeah, you're right. You should go do something else. So we ended up doing like a separate project. I remember being like very annoyed. I'm like, what are these people like looking at? And then a little bit later, the acquisition happened. So I actually it's funny, I interviewed for Google and I got an offer from Google, and they still it's not as common now, but at the time they were like, yeah, joining Google, we'll tell you what you work on when you show up here. And in my case, on the first day, they said, hey, you'll have to drive up to San Bruno, you're going to be working on YouTube. And
Mhm.
I was thrilled, right? It was because it was just after the acquisition. And I would say it's like when I joined, it was like there was like the YouTube team and then the new Google, mostly Google Video, but other parts of Google people had started to join sort of YouTube to sort of make it a thing. Um, I've There may be others that have done this, but I think I'm the only one that's worked at YouTube three different times. So I've like even though I've been at Google, like I ended up working for 2 years when I first joined Google. Then I went and did a bunch of other things. Then I came back and I think joined again 2011 to 2013. So saw a big slice of growth there. Then I went away again, worked on search for like 8 years, and then came back.
Mhm.
And so I feel very fortunate to have seen YouTube grow across these cycles in slices. So I worked 6 years, but across very different times. And each of those was like pretty incredible. To the point where the first time I worked at YouTube, uh, it was there was a very small team of people, and our job was to work on everything that was not the youtube.com desktop website, because that was the only thing that mattered in like 2007 and 9. So a very small team was doing APIs, mobile app, mobile website, integrations into television, all of that stuff, because there was like, oh, that's small compared to this big thing. And yeah, the place, it is a very unique culture. People think about how to build very differently. People think about there's a genuine love of like creators and what they're building, which I found, which I still find like very inspiring, and I love thinking about that stuff. But yeah, the initial days were even when I went back like many years later, right, 2011 to 2013, it was kind of I still tell people the kind of things that happened and the velocity with which we shipped. It was a pretty incredible place. It's still an incredible product, but now it's the size it is. It's run like the product that it needs to be. Like there are very good processes in place. They're very careful about how they release things. But yeah, I remember like the second time I joined, it was still even like crazy. People would launch stuff and nobody were like, "Oh, we launched that already." Well, I had no idea. Like, okay, cool. Like it was just the velocity of shipping was quite amazing.
Guy. Maybe Satyajit, let's talk about a bit more on how your journey at YouTube
Yeah,
and Google search kind of like give us the context.
I'll
This
give
is
you the
where you
context. Yeah,
you 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 started. Uh, this is how large it ended up becoming, and then you moved on to Google search, and then we'll segue into the most exciting thing these days, which is
use
Google
AI.
AI.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll maybe talk about. Maybe I'll talk about the first couple of times I worked at YouTube, and then segue to search. Um, so when I initially started, like I said, I worked on sort of uh, anything that was not YouTube.com. So we did deals with television people, and it was a very small, scrappy team, and we moved pretty fast. Then, for purely personal reasons, my boss kind of said, "Listen, you're doing well at YouTube, but we also have this TV ads business. Can you go work on that for a little bit?" So I worked on that. Then again, for purely personal reasons, I needed to move to New York, and so it meant if I wanted to stay at Google, I needed to take a new job. So I worked on payments for a couple of years. Uh, then uh, I needed to move back to California, so I worked on. I was the first product manager on games on what was then Google Plus, so in social gaming, but then ended up building what became Google Play Games today. Uh, and then around that time, so the people that I used to work with at YouTube basically pinged me and said, "Hey, would you consider coming back? Because we need someone to do live streaming on YouTube. We think it might be a thing, and we think you'd be great for it." So I ended up joining as the founding PM on YouTube Live. I ended up taking on news and sports as part of it. So we were doing things like the IPL and like all sorts of new stuff. So I took that on as well. And it was funny because I joined, I said yes, and was about to join like a few weeks later. And the person, like my boss's boss, said, "Oh, I'm really glad you joined." He's like, "Yeah, by the way, you should know, I think there's a 50% chance you have to shut down this business." And I was like, "Why didn't you tell me that before in the process?" He's like, "No, no, no. Like, we trust you to tell us if it's not working out, but we think there's something here. We want you to make this happen." And so that was my. It was an amazing year of building the product, realizing that we had incredibly impressive infrastructure, but it wasn't built for what YouTube creators needed. So changing the infrastructure, but also continuing to ship in that period, also making the business model work. So figuring out how to get ads that live needed, figuring out the deals that were needed. It was an amazing year of making that happen. And so I worked on that. And through a year, it went from, "Hey, will YouTube have live streaming? Is it actually worth it?" To, a year from, even a year later, was like, "Okay, this is clearly part of the site. It is important for the creator suite." And we continue to expand access. And like, I think by the time in that year, it went from very few people had access to live streaming to everyone that had like 1,000 subscribers was able to live stream, and the economics worked for us and all of that stuff. So it was an amazing year of like just getting that product to work, understanding what creators wanted, doing all these deals. And towards the end, the person that ran the tech org at YouTube asked me to be his chief of staff as well. So I did that for a year, which was an interesting experience, understanding how large orgs worked, right, versus working on one small thing. So I'd say I sort of went through that. And then similarly, I think a lot of connections, and this is the way a lot of jobs sort of work. Someone that I felt like I might be ready for something new. And some of the people that I used to work with on payments said, "Hey, listen, we want to start media verticals on search. You have all this YouTube experience. Why don't you come over and like help us start that?" And so that's how I ended up moving to search. I joined as, hey, I'm going to work on, just understanding TV and movie queries. But then over time, I added TV, movies, music, games, books as a vertical, events. So anything sort of in that media space. And then, over 8 years on search, I kept that part of the portfolio, but I just added and subtracted different things. So there's
Got
this
it.
thing called a knowledge graph, which is how Google understands the world. I was a knowledge graph PM for a while. For a while, I was the PM for all answers. So anything that was a white box on search that you saw, I worked on that. Um, then for a while, like I think, but de facto, I ended up doing search UI for a couple of years. Um, and then I there's purely out of interest, I started something. I love doing Easter eggs on search, and they're
Mhm.
like, oh, someone. It isn't actually a job, but you should start. It feels like you do this anyway, so you should just make it part of your job. So I started what was the delight team on search. So we did Easter eggs and took on doodles and stuff like that over time. And yeah, like that was an incredible run for about 8 years, where I think I touched almost every single part of Google search. And then that's when at some point again, like you sort of look for a change. I went back to YouTube, worked on YouTube shopping for a while
Mhm.
before I sort of decided to do AI at Google.
Got it. Satyajit, please tell us what exactly Google AI does,
Yeah, yeah.
and what got you excited, and what's your role at Google
Yeah,
AI?
I'll talk about. So obviously, there's a lot happening in AI at Google. There's obviously Google DeepMind, which builds the models, and then there's like all parts of the company that end up applying AI in different ways. So when um, my team specifically works on applied AI. So when I joined the team, it's in Google Research, and the idea was there are some problems which are half research, half product. Which is, the research is not done yet, so you probably still need to work on the models. You still need to actually do, core research to figure out, what needs to happen. But the product is not solved either. So at the time, the examples that I can talk about publicly are we launched language learning in India. So on search, you can practice English and how to speak. We were prototyping things like dubbing on YouTube. So upload something and it just translates to another language. And the thesis was, hey, some of these are just purely technical problems, but some of these are also product problems. So we're not going to learn what to build until people start using some form. And so that's where our team generally gets involved. And so we sort of sit at this wonderful intersection of like, hey, we still have to do research, like core research. We still have to do user research, like figuring out what people will need. Then we have to build and iterate on the product. So we typically work on those kinds of things. And so initially when we started, we worked on things across the company. So search, YouTube, cloud, all sorts of things. Over the last year, we're much more focused on I'd say things that matter to Android, Chrome, VR, glasses, things of that sort. So some of the examples, my team's been involved in. Project Astra got released. We did a bunch of small features for that. We announced this thing called Project Mariner, which is your browser doing things on your behalf.
Mhm.
And so my team worked on the quality side of that. And again, a bunch of other sort of things that are sort of either launched or about to launch that sort of, again, push how AI should make your day to day better. Yeah, and again, I think there's like a ton in this space. I'm happy to dive in more in any of these sections.
Absolutely. Satyajit, look, you're at the forefront of what's happening in AI, and it's going to touch, how we live our life,
Hmm.
about our work, about our health, about our
Yeah.
finances. Maybe give us kind of like a, what are we going to see in the next 3 5 years, how
Oof.
AI is going to impact, us into different areas of our lives.
Yeah, I that's a big question. So I'll go through maybe a few different things, right? Which is, I think, there is, I think we all intuitively, right? If I said to you, we try and compare any technology to other versions of technology, right? Like, I think that's a very natural human tendency. So the example a lot of people give is like, oh, AI is like electricity, or it's like the Industrial Revolution, or it's like, sort of the internet and mobile phones and all of that stuff. I think those are all good. I think the slight difference is, I do think it will be a tectonic shift in sort of everything we do. So imagine, I am old enough to have sort of lived a time before phones, before the internet, before the cloud was a thing, right? And today I cannot imagine living my life with, imagine we didn't have a phone, imagine the internet didn't work, imagine the cloud stuff. How would we even function? But the luxury I have is all of those changes happened over a very long time, like relatively speaking, right? Which is, the internet was supposed to transform all businesses, but it for 10 years, right, the internet was there, but like nothing really changed, right? Mobile was similar, right? For years, people were like, oh, mobile will change everything, mobile will change everything. But like, it didn't for a long time, then suddenly it did. I think, at least the way I see the impact of AI is, it will be the scale of all of these things, but the timeline will be incredibly compressed, right? So because the rate of change, it builds on all of these things, but the rate of change of the technology is truly, truly exponential. And I think what it's doing is, we all understand, when the internet came, it democratized access to knowledge. When sort of all, and it changed, just like I'd say, Google changed, how so many people live their lives. YouTube changed how so many people live their lives. What we're doing now is democratizing intelligence, right? So imagine if, and it's at this point, for most people, you have a pretty high level intelligence that would work for you for almost free, right? So imagine the power that gives each of us to like organize our lives, to get things done for us, to do work for us. It will change both the work we do and how we do it, right? So the thing I'm telling people is, you know what is truly going to shine is, your ability to communicate, and like sort of, there are certain things that, as great as AI will be, people will want other humans, be really good at that, and two, like, get really, really good at using these tools. Because again, it's like, imagine being the first person to use a computer for about a year before everyone else did. Imagine the advantage you would have had for that year, right? This is the level. If you start now, because again, I think people will, all of us by nature tend to be a little hesitant, adopting new technology. And which is why, by the way, I think some of the most interesting companies in the AI space are from like really, really young people, because they don't have that legacy. But to me, that's the magnitude of change we're coming. Like, almost every job, certainly, any job that involves sitting at a computer for a long amounts of time, is, if you're not transforming it now, that transformation will be forced on you in the next year or two. And so I think starting to work on that is really important. But then, honestly, just the way each of us will live better lives will. So there's the baseline of, it will optimize our current lives better. And at some point, and I think that's fairly recent, if you can imagine the breakthroughs it will have in material science, in medicine, it will enable us to live hopefully better and longer lives. And so to me, that is, the the world will change just so incredibly, like, in the next 10 years. It's, yeah, I can't wait for that, to see that. And I can't wait to sort of, all of us are going to experience it. And again, this is me sort of, there's like AI doomers, AI maximalists. I'm sort of probably more on the AI maximalist side. But yeah, it's an incredibly exciting time, I think, to be in technology, to be sort of working at this time. Yeah, so I feel pretty pumped about that generally.
Got it. Satyajit, maybe an example you could give where you've used AI and just blew your mind. You're like, wow, this is also possible now.
Oof, there's so many. Okay, I'll tell you. So I'll tell you the way I even. So I'll start with a few simple examples, and then we'll go from there, right? Which is the simplest one is just how I brainstorm and think about things, right? So for years, a large part of our job is, thinking through, what are our thoughts, what are our ideas, how do you come up with new ideas, and there are a bunch of sort of well-worn techniques over the years, and generally for me, it means late at night, blocking off enough time, keeping clutter away. It used to mean like, I used to take down notes, and then when I had like a question, I'd go to a computer. I find now I make so much faster progress. I literally fire up four different LLMs and just
Mhm.
start talking. And then it's like literally having four incredibly smart friends that are smart in different ways. And at some point, one or two of them start saying something interesting, so you go deep dive there. And I find that the ideas I have are so much more refined and uh, I get so much further, so much faster than I would otherwise before. And then there are like little examples, right? So I have my kids are now 11 and 8. So I'd say about a year ago, I was like trying to convince my daughter to do some math, and it was like she was just not enjoying it. So I went to like a couple of LLMs and said, "Hey, can you generate problems that a second grader should do, but make all the problems about princesses and scientists and unicorns?" And I generated a 10. And she was like, "Oh, this is interesting. Let me go sit through that." And so, I printed this out and like she did it. But I think you can sort of, this was a very simple example, but you can see truly what truly customized education might look like. Right? Oh, you like basketball? I'm going to generate problems about that. You seem to be doing well in this place. Let me take you in that direction. And so these are fairly simple things that are happening. Um, but yeah, you see it every single, more people are showing agency and pushing things forward than sort of I think ever before. And I think it's changing what sort of individuals can do. Actually, my favorite example, this is an old example now, was I think Tanmay Bhatt talked about an ad he did with Dhoni, right, a long time ago. And he kind of said, like, oh, normally I'd call in storyboarders and then I'd call in like script writers, all of that. Here I had this idea, and as writers, we just use, I guess at the time it was DALI and like ChatGPT and just push a little bit more. And something that would have taken, another 3 weeks, we were able to like take to the client right away without involving people. And it's some combination of like, if you think of this as democratizing intelligence and capability, each of us has a little bit more now. Um, Very tactically, I think the technology is not 100% here, but if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said, oh, every product manager on my team, instead of coming to me with a PRD or a plan or like mocks, will just come with a prototype. And some PMs on my team are able to do that now for certain things where they've mocked it up, and again, without involving anyone else, an engineer or designer, anyone. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a product manager. Sometimes a designer will do it, or whatever, right? Like here's the thing I want to build. It sort of works, but it's like a rough prototype. And I think that, so these are things that are already happening. I think you're just going to see that pushed like a little bit more every single sort of every few months, because that's really the pace of development on this stuff.
Yeah, it's just incredible, Satyajit. I'll give you an example of
Yeah.
it. My podcasting, earlier, I would spend like at least more than an hour, could be 2 or 3 hours figuring out, okay, this should be in the top moment. These sections should be in top moment. These should be, for the snippets. And
Yeah.
now I just put it in the AI and he does it for me within few minutes.
Yeah.
On the other side, earlier I would take an hour to figure out, okay, I'm launching this podcast. This is what I want to write about it. And now again, like I put it in the Chat GPT or Gemini, and it just gives me the entire thing within few minutes. It's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah, yeah. And it's one of these things that is truly magical what this enables, right? And on a very human level, I think it changes how we live, how we do sort of how we do work. I think that will change like fundamentally. And again, I think we're very early, right? Like, you can, you have demos of like glasses and all these things, right? Like I uh, when I tell people, oh yeah, all our glasses will have computers in them and stuff, people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, I wear glasses. I'm fine with like,
Hmm.
them being in there. But I think it will change how we, sort of live and work day to day. Yeah, I think, and again, I think the big change is unlike before where we had, I'd say, years and in some cases decades to get used to it. I think here it'll come much, much faster.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be a very exciting few years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I was talking to somebody in, they live in tier two, and
Yeah.
like I wouldn't say everyone is the overstatement, but a lot of people are just using AI now. Like it has become a verb.
So I think the incredible thing about uh, India in general is, and I think, again, this is thanks to Geo and everyone having like access on their phones, is the awareness spreads pretty fast. And like any new product now, right? Like trying is easy, right? And so if people try it and find utility, and like I remember, right, when uh, I remember people. So my two favorite examples is I remember my mother's asked me about like tech products from time to time, but I remember like I was on a phone call and she actually asked me like, can you explain to me what ChatGPT is and what it does and all of that stuff? And I was like, okay, that's actually quite remarkable, right? Like she's hearing it and asking me about it. And then similarly, I have another relative who is again sort of he's sort of not almost retired now, but he kind of said, oh, if I had notebook LM, another 10, 15 years ago, I might have kept working because how a lot of the issues I had were with like people would give me contracts and then it would take 2, 3 years and I would have to go find the contract and the clause. And he's like, if I just put it all in, and it would have been, life would have been so much easier.
Hmm.
And so I do think it is truly transformational what we're seeing.
Yeah,
And yeah, the growth rates of an adoption is off the chart.
yeah.
Yeah, and I do think it, I had expected, if you'd asked me a year and a half ago, right, when I first started working on this, I was like, oh, this, we might have very localized LLMs tuned to countries. That never. I'm kind of surprised that like sort of the main model providers almost caught up and like they ended up being pretty decent in sort of most of these languages versus like us seeing a bunch of local LLMs taking off. But that
Mhm.
might change over time, but we'll see.
Got it. Satyajit, and I think to your point, I think India is the second largest market for Chat GPT now. I think number of
Right?
users.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even
and
with that. Yeah.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
mean, I think it was an interesting. I the thing you do as a PM is you think about people that you're building for and who they are and how they're using the products, right? So on the time that I was on search, and definitely by the time I went back to YouTube for the third time, uh, the country with the maximum usage of search and YouTube was India, right? And to your point, it was the interesting thing to me. The second time I went was, so the third time I went to YouTube, right? So one of the things I love to do is you want to understand what people are doing, so you just sample a bunch of queries or you sample a bunch of videos just to see like randomly what is happening. And the exact thing I used to tell people is, first when I used to sample videos globally, you'd sometimes find something from India. Then you sample videos from India. Like the first two times I was working at YouTube, I would generally find a video in English, clearly like from, sort of Mumbai or Delhi or something like that, and tune very much trying to sort of do something that was done in the US or in the West for India. On the other hand, when I went, if you sample like even let's say 4 or 5 years ago, you the the average video that I would get from India was, typically like in sort of one of the other languages. So generally, very often I end up with a Malayalam video for whatever reason, and it would be clearly targeted from that person to people like sort of around them, right? And for them. It was very, very targeted in a very specific way. And so I think that change, right? Like, so if you think about the number one country for Google search and YouTube at this point are India. And so I'm not surprised, like, ChatGPT would get that adoption. And it's like, who are you building for is an interesting question for a lot of these large companies.
Talking about India, Satyajit,
Yeah.
what excites you the most about Indian technology ecosystem? I know you spend, about a month a year in India now. You have connection to India, so let's talk about those things.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, all of so I think there's an intellectual connection and then a personal connection, right? So I think the personal connection is you obviously sort of have an affinity for what you know well, what you care about, all of that stuff. So that's the reason I am excited to, like, sort of learn about Indian startups, advise startups in the space, all of that stuff. The second is, I think, just as a market, right? It is the pace of innovation is incredible, right? And I think even frankly, the maturity of the ecosystem is also sort of remarkable. A good friend and I were chatting a couple of weeks ago, and over the years, different friends have sort of asked me to help advise their startup or come talk to their product team about how to build things. And it's an interesting transition, right? Which is, 10 years ago, people were asking, very like, hey, how should we think about building a product? Can you advise us on this specific thing? Uh, and then you saw a transition where actually enough people figured that stuff out. And so then they were asking about, okay, how do we structure our teams? How do we grow fast, etc. And then now I think you have a generation of leaders. You've had like multiple stages of companies, sort of doing that well, and multiple generations of, product leaders, eng leaders who understand what scaling looks like, what scaling an org looks like. And so now the questions are much more. So again, I would say I still get some of those questions because everyone wants to understand scaling and like how to build good products and sort of how to think about users in a particular way. But now you also get okay, how should we, there are some things that are very, very, building great products requires you to truly, truly understand your users. And I think for people that are in India, they have a depth of understanding of the consumer market in India, which is like quite remarkable, right? Like, and you sort of, every time I visit and see like an innovation, I go like, oh man, this is incredible, right? I would not have thought about this living somewhere else. But then you also see, like, to me, that when you simply have, there's this, I forget the analogy, right? Like there's multiple Indias is the thing that I read pretty often online. You must be familiar with it, right? Which is there's one market which, sort of looks like Singapore, another
Yeah,
market that looks like, yeah. And so
yeah.
I think as
So
people
India
build,
one, India two, India three.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, all of these markets are interesting. All of them have different challenges. Building for each of these is very different. And so to me, that dynamic is really interesting. The growth in the market is really interesting. I think the big difference from, maybe when I was growing up is everyone now wants to do a startup and wants to make it successful, right? Like I think, when I was in college, it was very rare for someone to start their company. And when they did, it was generally like, sort of in the outsourcing space or something of that sort, right? There were very few product companies. And now I feel like that's where the energy is, right? And so I think to me, it's like incredibly exciting to like sort of see that. And I think the space is, and you have that mix of like, I think people in the enterprise space, people are still building, in India for the world. I think in the consumer space, you have a mix of like building for India and then a little bit of building for the rest of the world. But that space is incredibly exciting. And I think now, as AI makes it easier for people to like build good products, I think you're going to see even more sort of innovation in the space.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's a matrimonial website in India called Shadi.com.
Yeah, of course.
Earlier, the number one preference was a government employee, and now it's actually a startup founder.
Oh,
So
that's great.
India has
That's
come a
incredible to
long,
hear,
long
actually.
way. It has become a verb. One last one, Satyajit. Look, we know you, as one of the best product leaders globally. But what do your friends know you for? Who are you outside of work?
Ooh. I think my friends, hopefully, I think know me as someone that cracks a lot of jokes. Outside of work, I watch a lot of movies. I watch a lot of television. So I think growing up, I had my friends' general memory of me is I would drag them for every single movie,
Hmm.
and they'd be like, "No, no, no! Like, you think every single movie is good." So I watch a lot of movies. I read a lot of books. I play. I I don't play very well, but I play basketball whenever I can.
Hmm.
Um yeah, I think, and again, I think I'm at the age where all my free time is spent. Maybe you can see some of them over here, but like all my free time is spent with my kids and my wife. So that's me at this age.
Got it. And were your kids, were they able to figure out what game they can play with you?
So I
Context for
one
the audience, you had written this on LinkedIn that
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're playing Grow Garden. So my son said, Grow Garden. He's like, okay, this is a game. It's very, I guess it's the most popular Roblox game right now, but it's also like, it's simple enough, even you can do it, was the way he put it.
Mhm.
Which is, by the way, like, it's an interesting lesson that I played a lot of video games when I was young, but I basically now need a 11-year-old to coach me on how to play a lot of some of these games because I was like, yeah, what is happening? Like, I don't know what's going on. And he has to explain the whole thing to me and all that stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Thank you so much,
Of
Satyajit.
course.
Appreciate you for making the time to do this.
I really appreciated the chat. I really enjoyed it. It was great chatting.